Immigrant survivors of domestic violence are encountering new obstacles to safety as critical legal and funding protections erode. Survivors applying for U visas given to victims of violent crime and VAWA visas, which allow survivors to petition for immigrant status separate from an abusive partner, face greater scrutiny and stricter application procedures. Asylum protections for gender-based violence survivors have also been gutted. New anti-DEIA restrictions have been enforced for domestic violence organizations who receive grant funding from federal agencies, including the Office of Violence Against Women and Housing and Urban Development. The looming specter of ICE raids has also created an overwhelming climate of fear in immigrant communities. Many survivors of domestic violence are not reporting their abuse. Today, we feature 3 speakers who are on the front lines of supporting survivors of gender-based violence. Please welcome Carmen McDonald, Executive Director of the Survivor Justice Center, Fatima Kololamit, Executive Director of the Center for the Pacific Asian Family, and Morgan Wayball, Director of Client Advocacy and Legal Services at the Tahiti Justice Center. Mrs. McDonald will also introduce a client from the Survivor Justice Center who will talk briefly about how she got a VAWA visa. We asked reporters to enter questions in the chat. We will address as many as we can immediately after each speaker presents. We ask speakers to speak at a moderate pace for simultaneous interpreters in Mandarin, Spanish, and Korean. And now I welcome our first panelist, Carmen McDonald, who will discuss the underreporting of domestic violence cases over the past 7 months and the underlying factors. Go ahead, Carmen. Welcome.
Hi, Pilar. Thank you so much. Thank you for having me to be here to talk about the devastating impact the recent immigration enforcement has had on immigrant survivors. I am the Executive Director at the Survivor Justice Center. We provide free legal services for low-income survivors in Los Angeles County. We also have an integrated social work model where we provide full and holistic services because we know survivors face multiple barriers. About 70% of our clients are immigrants. Los Angeles is home to one of the largest immigrant communities in the nation. And when the raids began, the fear they generated spread far beyond folks that were targeted. And that spread to survivors and silenced survivors. The impact is that it keeps people away from the help they need, and it makes our communities less safe. Every day, the team at the Survivor Justice Center works with the survivors of domestic violence, sexual assault, and human trafficking, many of whom are just here trying to seek safety and dignity. We provide mostly services in family law and in immigration and are seeing an increased fear amongst all of our clients. We know that after the ICE raids began, complaints of discrimination and hate dropped in LA County by about 1/3. And not because incidents were down, but because people were afraid to report. And we see a similar pattern with reporting domestic violence. While government and nonprofit organizations are aware that this is happening and are launching Know Your Rights campaigns to try to reach people that have gone underground and provide legal education, folks are still afraid, specifically survivors. When they see officers in their neighborhoods in plain clothes or with masks, or bounty hunters who have been sent to pick up their friends and neighbors without warning, then they wonder, well, if I go to court to try to protect myself from abuse, will I be next? Will I be picked up? Data shows that many who are being detained have no criminal charges filed, making everyone afraid, including survivors. Imagine you have fled abuse, you're ready to stand up in court and face your abuser, but instead of thinking about safety and justice, you wonder, will ICE be waiting at the courthouse doors? While the family court and other state courthouses do accommodate remote appearances, we still find clients don't want to go. Many fear that their abuser will turn them in. In the 20 plus years I've worked with survivors, that's always been a fear. We know survivors have multiple barriers, and now the fear is actualized. We've lost complete contact with one of our clients. She asked us to cancel her restraining order and to close her case with our office, and we cannot locate her. We have had clients tell us they're skipping critical medical appointments. One client didn't want to go to a dialysis appointment that was located near a Home Depot. Clients aren't reporting wage theft. They're staying silent about other crimes they're experiencing. And the silence is not safety, it's danger. I can't express enough that our clients are anxious. Our staff is completely overwhelmed by the need, and our communities are in fear. Our clients are calling us more than ever, telling us they're afraid. They might have seen ICE in their neighborhood and they're panicked. They don't want to go on public transport. They don't want to go to the DMV to renew an identification card. Even with remote hearings, as I said, they're afraid. We are doing what we can in the community to accommodate. We've moved a lot of clinics and meetings into virtual meetings. But they're afraid to even report to law enforcement for unrelated issues. We've had a client who was in a car accident that didn't want the police to come. Another person told us they were pulled over and wanted to say in that moment to the police, my abuser has sexually assaulted me, has weapons at home, but was afraid to continue any interaction with the police officer. People are just more reactive to everything that they perceive the government would be displeased about. They are worried that they're causing trouble or are going to be on the radar. One of our clients talked about being afraid to report to a landlord about a problem or to apply for public benefits that they are entitled to. School admissions are low. It's impacting children too. We've heard from nonprofits and schools that this summer, a nonprofit told us that 50% less students that were registered came to the school. And so this impacts, like we said, not just folks who are being targeted. And what's discouraging for my team, they tell me, is that we have worked so hard for so many years to educate survivors of their rights and that they don't have to worry about being detained for speaking out about abuse. But they're worried again. We've recently learned from another domestic violence organization that a VAWA client has been detained. ICE had come looking for her partner and a few days later came back for her. The Monday's Supreme Court ruling did not help. The dissenting opinion talked about the seizures being traumatic and disruptive, that people are being targeted for how they speak, where they work, how they look, the chilling effect to speak up is significant. I know that my colleagues will talk about this impact nationwide. We know that what's happening in LA is happening across the nation, that advocates all across the country are talking about less survivors wanting to get support. It is important to know that even if you're afraid to report, there is legal help. There are organizations like ours that help survivors. When you meet with your attorney, it's a confidential relationship. There are hotlines you can call for help and get referrals if you're, anywhere else in the country. There's also protections for children. There's educational protections. There's mental health support. There are organizations doing family preparedness planning in the event that a parent or a guardian is deported. And so there are resources that we want to make sure folks know about, but to understand that this is not just a humanitarian crisis, it's a public safety crisis. When survivors are silenced, abusers go free. When immigrants are too afraid to call the police, everyone is less safe. Thank you for giving me this time to talk about this important issue.
Thank you so much, Carmen. We have several questions in the chat. Araceli Martinez from La Opinión, ask your question, please.
Thank you, Pilar. Good day to everybody. I would like to ask, what is the current processing time for VAWA visas? I have been hearing that it has taken a long time. And what advice would you give to immigrants so they are not afraid to report domestic violence when we see that, for example, in Los Angeles, the LAPD is helping to these ICE agents when they are doing the raids? So I would be in panic. So, so what would be, I would like if you can give us information about the current processing time, and also how can I avoid not to be in panic to report domestic violence? Thank you.
Thank you for your question. I am aware of the lengthy processing times. I don't know the number off the top of my head. One of my colleagues might be able to share that. I agree. The fear is real. You know, I can tell you, I have met with the mayor just this week, and it is LAPD wants to take the reports of domestic violence and take them seriously. But what survivors can do is reach out to an organization like ours. We provide accompaniment. We have social work interns who also accompany folks to LAPD to report, or to a DPSS office to get public benefits. And work with a lawyer, get advice from a lawyer, and a lawyer that practices immigration law. Like, one reason I don't want to say the processing time, because I'm not providing direct services and I would never want to say information that I don't know. So it's important to talk to someone. And we have a team of immigration lawyers that are in the weeds and working together. And Los Angeles, the immigration community supporting supporting survivors is very strong. There's a LA VAWA network, and all of the attorneys meet and work together to do things like address issues if LAPD is reporting to ICE, or to work on advocacy with USCIS. And so reach out to one of the nonprofits providing free legal services to survivors. We are all impacted, but we are here and we care, and we want to hear from folks.
And another speaker will address the VAWA issue. So we're going to move on to a question from Christopher Young. Christopher, what news organization are you with? And please ask your question. Christopher? Maybe he stepped out. Okay, I'm going to ask the question. His question was, prior to the current administration, had domestic violence reporting been improving? And is there any data on that?
So I don't have data on that. I can look that up and provide it later. But so during COVID, we saw reports of domestic violence decrease. And we saw a similar issue where folks, in that instance for domestic violence, you were sort of trapped in your home with your abuser. And there wasn't a lot of that. There was fear about going out. And, when there was lockdown orders, you couldn't go to a LAPD office, or you couldn't go to your sheriff's station. And so numbers went down, but we did understand that hotline calls were doubling or tripling. So there are domestic violence hotlines and sexual assault hotlines that people can call for help. And so we as a community really strategized on how to continue services. And in some ways, those things that we did, like having remote appearances and this ability, has helped us now. When survivors don't want to come into the office, we can accommodate. And and as for the numbers, I will add that we believe violence is often underreported no matter what, that not everyone is saying what's happening. I get calls every day, that your abuser is in law enforcement, or, where will you live? Or how will you support your children? And so the barriers survivors face are significant. And we understand. So even when numbers go up, there's still others. And now we've seen on a national level where domestic violence was downplayed as something that just happens in the home. And so again, we're worried always about the chilling effect across the board for survivors when we see that fear is instilled and abuse is minimized.
Okay, there's several questions here regarding how do we address this? What kind of assurance we can give the public that they should come forward, et cetera, et cetera. I don't know that you have a magic wand on this, but what would be your advice? And maybe reporters have the key also covering the issue the way that they are right now.
Yes, I mean, we're very committed to providing services to survivors, holistic, confidential services. We are all impacted. So yes, I would ask all of you here to lift this up, to talk about it, to ask for funding. If you are an attorney or an interpreter, we always need support and pro bono services. If you know of a foundation that's funding, we all need funding and support. If you know major donors, individual donors, like there is a way to help. I know people want to help and they ask every day how they can help. So if you see something, say something, reach out, provide a survivor their resources and be there for folks. If someone's afraid, you can let them know there are places to call to get help, and we safety plan. And so we know safety planning is individualized for the survivor. So safety planning might include that you live in a place that's impacted by ICE officers, and we can talk about your rights, and we could talk about what is the best path for the survivor who knows their life the best on what their needs are. But there's lots of organizations like mine where we have case managers and social workers and attorneys that are here for you. Call the national hotline. Don't be afraid to call a hotline because it's not it's confidential. And you're going to be referred to the local organizations in Los Angeles if you're in LA that can help you, and the same for wherever you are.
If you can write down the hotline number
Yes.
there in the chat, that would be great. Thank you, Carmen. I'm going to move on to the next panelist, and that would be Morgan Weibel, who will discuss tightening restrictions for U and U visas and VAWA visas, as well as the issue of asylum claims under gender-based violence. Morgan, welcome.
Thank you so much. I'm an immigration attorney by trade, and I work with the Tahrir Justice Center, which is a national nonprofit. We have 5 offices across the country, and what we do is we provide free legal and social services to immigrant survivors of gender-based violence. So we all want to live in safe homes and communities. And we know that women who come to the United States seeking safety and protection are brave, they're powerful, and they're courageous. They're saving their lives and also their children's lives, as are those who are standing up to violence here in the US in their homes and seeking the protections that they are already entitled to under US law. But now, as you heard from Carmen, more than ever before, survivors are less likely to trust the system because of the government's policies that entangle local law enforcement with federal immigration actions. The climate of fear for survivors who are witnessing arrests at courthouses and other previously protected areas is real. Last month, we assisted an immigrant survivor who was applying for VAWA relief as she sought an emergency protective order against her abuser with whom she was still living. While serving the abuser with that protective order, a local sheriff threatened to report the survivor to immigration officers for deportation. She was terrified and nearly gave up on pursuing a more permanent protective order out of fear that she might be arrested when she appeared in court. And she's not alone. As the government creates roadblocks to relief, survivors are questioning whether it is worth it to even pursue the relief that is still owed to them under our laws. In 1994, landmark bipartisan legislation, commonly referred to as the Violence Against Women's Act, or VAWA, was passed. It was the first comprehensive federal response to addressing domestic violence, and it created protections for certain family members of abusive U.S. citizens and green card holders to obtain their own immigration status without the participation or even the knowledge of their abusers. Now, that was necessary because immigrant survivors are uniquely vulnerable, as their abusers, who typically had to begin the immigration paperwork and support the application throughout the process, were using the survivor's immigration status as a tool to wield power and control over them, essentially entrapping them within violent relationships. So what VAWA did was it allowed a pathway for domestic violence survivors to apply on their own without the participation of their abusers. And then over the next few decades, VAWA protections were strengthened through subsequent reauthorizations by Congress. So VAWA is a law that was passed by Congress, and in order for it to be eliminated or substantially changed, it would take an act of Congress. Now, similarly, the U and T visas for trafficking survivors, U visas for survivors of certain violent crimes, was created in 2000. And it was meant to be a tool for law enforcement to investigate and litigate cases of certain violent crimes. So if you're an immigrant victim, or all of your victims of a certain crime are immigrants, and they're fearful to come forward to report a crime, then law enforcement isn't able to make arrests or provide protection to the rest of the community from those who are harming immigrants in the first place. So the entire premise of these visas was to create safety for survivors to come forward, report, cooperate in the prosecution of those crimes. But the administration continues to erode that sense of safety right now by insisting that all law enforcement carry out immigration actions. I just want to take a moment to point out that for the U and the T visa to be eliminated, it would also similarly take an act of Congress. However, there are other steps that this administration has taken and continues to take to make it much harder for survivors to access protection. For example, they're using their extreme vetting. They've added interviews to VAWA application processes. They early on in the administration eliminated previous guidance that exempted survivors from enforcement actions. So now a VAWA applicant and even someone with an approved VAWA application can be detained and deported. They also changed the process of what happens when a VAWA, U, or T visa is denied. Previously, the person was just left without any status, but now the administration is placing those individuals into removal proceedings where they have to go before a judge to defend against deportation. So the stakes are much, much higher. And unfortunately, what we are seeing is that some survivors are just not willing to take those risks. Now, let me turn to the issue of gender-based asylum and take a moment to address the recent action of Attorney General Bondi in certifying to herself the matter of SSFM case, in which she walked back decades of progress that was made in recognizing domestic and other forms of gender violence as violations of women's human rights. In short, her decision returned us to the year 2018, where the then Attorney General Sessions declared that women fleeing domestic violence should generally be denied asylum. However, the law is clear. Asylum claims must be considered on a case-by-case basis. So what does the Attorney General's recent decision really mean for survivors? It means that asylum seekers with attorneys will have to put in so much more work. They will likely have to ask survivors to speak and spend extra time testifying about their past traumas. They may need to call on country conditions expert witnesses to testify in their cases. And those same attorneys are now going to have to dedicate pages upon pages of their legal briefs to make out the legal arguments that they used to be able to just cite to one specific case in order to meet that legal burden. But for unrepresented asylum seekers, I think sadly it is now next to impossible for them to win their cases without attorneys. Perhaps most concerning is that this provides a justification to immigration judges who were already inclined to reject asylum claims of survivors to do so without fair consideration of each individual case. And the reality is, the most determinative factor in a survivor's chance at success may now be based on the location in which they file their application for asylum. because so much is going to be left to the federal circuit courts, whose treatment of domestic violence asylum claims varies so widely across the country. Now, no one believes that geography should determine the fate of a survivor's safety, and yet here we are. And it's not inconsequential because these are life and death stakes, as women and families will be deported to countries where they face grave risks, including femicide and homicide. So, what is the solution? Well, this is exactly why many of us have been calling on Congress to legislate a sixth ground for asylum that is based on gender, so that the fate of survivors' cases are not left to the political leanings of those in power or determined by the place where they file their asylum application. But we also need police to provide public safety and not immigration enforcement, so survivors can continue to access the protections available to them under US law, because none of us is safe until all of us are safe. The government's efforts to narrow gender-based survivors' abilities to access legal protections in the US through restrictive policies and antiquated interpretations of domestic violence are very concerning, but they cannot undo years of advocacy and progress led by survivors with protections enshrined into law by bipartisan lawmakers year after year. We will not be deterred. For now, people can better protect themselves by getting lawyers, and at the Tahrir Justice Center, we're going to continue centering the needs and the realities of survivors in our work to end gender-based violence in all of its forms and to ensure safe and thriving communities for all of us. Happy to take questions now.
I'm sorry, I was muted. Thank you. Thank you, Morgan, so much. There's a question by Nora Estrada. She asked me to ask it from you. Do you have an estimate in your head or somewhere about how many people could be affected, let's say, yearly by these new restrictions? How many people are we talking about here?
So the government puts out statistics on asylum applicants yearly. It's not that every year we have the same amount of asylum applicants. We're in a unique position right now because the border is all but closed. So I think the best way to go about trying to answer that based on data would be looking at last year's application statistics to see how many people nationwide applied. But again, it can vary significantly and certainly does when the border is all but shut and folks aren't making it through to be able to apply. You have to be on US soil in order to apply for asylum. So that's another challenge that folks are facing right now.
Another question from Aitana Vargas, also interesting. Will women from certain countries have a harder time or face additional barriers when applying to visas, U visas, maybe VAWA or others? Have you seen that happen? Different nationalities getting different treatment?
The decision that AG Bondi just issued, each individual applicant comes from a different country, but I've never seen the courts apply that. And in fact, there's actually some precedent that says, we can't just take one case and apply it to the group or to that country. So differential treatment shouldn't flow based on where the person is coming from, but it will definitely be impacted based on where they apply, right? The Ninth Circuit, where California sits, has much better case law based on women's claims than the Fifth Circuit, where our Texas office sits, for example.
Okay. Let's see what else. Rebecca Bartus, you want to ask your question? And what's your news organization, please?
Hi, yes, thank you. I'm with Amerikai Népszava, a Hungarian newspaper. Officials have described it as a felony to harbor and conceal undocumented immigrants. How are domestic violence organizations navigating this kind of rhetoric while ensuring confidentiality and safety for survivors who may fear deportation? And do any protections exist to prevent survivor information from being shared with immigration enforcement?
Yeah, so one of the quintessential pieces of the whole humanitarian-based system is something that we refer to as Section 1367 confidentiality, which means that survivors' information shouldn't be shared either by the agency to other agencies or by those that are protecting them. Attorneys and those that are working with survivors have different ethical obligations around confidentiality. But to the first part of your question, it is a serious concern. I mean, we've seen and heard from this administration both rhetoric around going after immigration attorneys and making immigration attorneys fearful for their law licenses and the way they're practicing. And I, imagine and envision that domestic violence shelters and agencies working with survivors could similarly be concerned about some of this rhetoric.
Thank you, Morgan. So now let's go to Carmen, who will introduce Juana, who is a client. Carmen, go ahead.
Thank you. I'm so grateful to our client, Juana, who just a couple weeks ago received her green card based on her VAWA self-petition. She is so brave and resilient and powerful, and we were able to help her family as well. I always talk about the impact of our work does unite families and keep families together. And so, Juana, I turn it over to you to share your story.
Welcome, Juana.
Thank you. Good morning, everyone. My name is Juana Padilla, and I'm a survivor of VAWA, domestic violence. And I was really lucky to find this legal center that they give me the tools and advice and help that I need to get my status. It takes me like 5 years, but during the process, they were really nice with me. They were supporting. They were always answering all my questions. I was afraid to ask, to even say, that I was abused. And it's hard. It's hard sometimes to go forward, and especially when your husband is an ex-military and they put in your head, you have no one and you have no one. And I see it myself when everything is hard. I call police. They will show up to my house, and he would put his uniform in the table, and they would say, "Oh, everything is fine," and they would never make a report. They would left, and for me that was like, it's true. And since I have no family here in the country, I'm from Mexico, it was more hard for me to look forward, and it took me a while to step out. I even left the country. I went back to my country for 6 years. I take my kids. And I came back because he kidnapped my kids, and I had the opportunity to come back to start all over. And that's when I found them, and they were like really helpful. They give me all the tools right away. They take me maybe like a year or 8 months to a year to get my work permit, to get my social, everything. And I have a little one that was born in Mexico, and they helped me too. They helped me with her. She have a condition that she needs to be treated here, and my fear was that if I don't get my residence, or if I don't get my status here, I was gonna send back in my country for my daughter to get treatment. It was gonna be really hard, but thanks to them, I'm here. I barely got my resident card. My little one get the resident card, and with all this Trump administration that is going crazy, I was afraid too that they're gonna get me and they're gonna send me back, and my little one is not gonna get treatment. But thanks God, we got it. We got it, and thanks to them, and I'm glad for all you guys that do all this work, all this organization. Any woman with any nationality have the rights, and like, thank you for all your work and support for people that you guys help, like me, to get family together. And because I have 2 kids that are born here and one that is born in Mexico, so I can't split, I can't. But they make the miracle, and thanks God I have my legal status now, and I'm really really thankful to them, to Carmen and all her staff, and Jason that it was my attorney all the time. Thank you.
Well, thank you, Juana. Your story is a ray of hope, and what a nightmare for you and your kids. I'm glad it's over, and thank you for your courage in coming to us and sharing your story with us. We really appreciate it.
Thank you. Thank you
Thank you,
for
Juana.
listening to me.
Absolutely. And we're going to move on now to our third panelist, Fatima Kolomami. I'm sorry, I'm butchering your last name, Komolamet, discusses new restrictions and funding for domestic violence organizations.
Thank you so much, Pilar, and also Sunita for inviting me to this really incredible space. And Juana, what an incredible, dynamic woman you are and warrior on behalf of not just yourself, but also your children and other women who are going to see and witness your journey and be inspired by that, and hopefully be able to also seek services for themselves because they see that it's possible. So thank you for sharing your story. It is not easy, even in virtual boxes, right? And especially it's not easy being so vulnerable. So I really want to say I appreciate that. And to be in this space is amazing. It is, I have to say, on a Friday morning, it is really depressing to talk about all of the things that we're dealing with all in one space. But I'm here today to be able to talk about some of the restrictions that we are dealing with in terms of the funding. So let me introduce myself first. I'm Fatima Komolamet, and I have the honor and privilege of serving as the Executive Director for Center for the Pacific Asian Family, which was established in 1978. And our mission is to build healthy and safe communities by addressing the root causes and consequences of family violence and violence against women. And our commitment is to ensuring that we are meeting the specific cultural and language needs of Asian Pacific Islander women and their families. We provide a multilingual crisis hotline, which I actually put in the chat for you all as a reference. It's there, and we always have a live person who's on the line, because we oftentimes know that if there is not that initial connection, that connection will drop immediately, and that survivor may not get the help that they need. We also have an emergency shelter program and 2 transitional shelter programs, a really robust community partnerships program, and a dynamic youth prevention program, and then crisis intervention services. And we're based in Los Angeles. So as to what Carmen and Morgan so eloquently and passionately have described, the climate in LA is really dire. And it is the champions of our legal advocates and attorneys, and also, reporters such as Pilar and Sunita that are able to bring awareness to this. So Center for the Pacific Asian Family, as we are looking into providing refuge and healing within our intensive, intervention services, we have seen the impacts of the barriers that immigrant survivors face. Oftentimes, what we see with our API, Asian Pacific Islander clients, is that immigration has been used as part of the dynamics of domestic violence. There is coercive control, there is a threat of deportation, and that has typically been within that person who is in their intimate partner, who is the person who is in their space at all times. And now what we see that it is actually in complete ensconced in our government, right? And really threatening our survivors in that end. And with that, we are definitely seeing and fearing that we will not be able to reach those survivors because of the threats that are happening right now. And so I just wanted to kind of bring that to the table in terms of the vulnerability that immigrant survivors face because of their limited English proficiency, their lack of employment history within the United States, and oftentimes the coercive and exploitative use of immigration status as a means to also further oppress and further abuse both the survivor and their children, which is why it's imperative that services like CPAF exist, where we can provide that refuge, we can provide the comprehensive services in terms of advocacy and accompaniment, and also really just helping to navigate that survivor through their journey, so that way they understand what they need in order to, be able to live their own lives and live independently. So, the work is already difficult. And in the nonprofit sector and in the gender-based violence sector, we are oftentimes always on kind of the fringes of any potential government cuts, because usually social services like us tend to be not necessarily prioritized. So lately, in this year, the landscape has been increasingly more difficult with different types of restrictions that are coming up from sources of funding that have actually been longstanding, incredible supporters of gender-based violence organizations. So Office of Violence Against Women has been a strong partner of CPAP and so many other organizations, and actually continues to be a very strong partner. There have been additional and new restrictions that come with the funding, and those restrictions, I'm not going to go into all 12 of them, but the purpose and the goal of those restrictions is to align with the Trump administration's executive orders promoting, gender ideology that is specific to gender roles of women and men, being able to also ensure that domestic violence is really looked upon as more of a rooted within criminal justice and not necessarily looking at socialized norms and traditional and gendered roles. So a lot of these restrictions create more barriers for us to be able to actually do our work in the way that we need to, right? We, as many organizations, our work is rooted in, if you're identifying as a survivor of domestic violence and sexual assault, we will serve you. That is our job. Our job is to be able to help the most vulnerable survivors and to give them access to our services. And in these types of restrictions, they just create a sense of, they can create a sense of nervousness and trepidation, and also just doubting like what you can do and how vast are these restrictions going to go as far as being able to scrutinize and monitor the organization. So I think that this is all still new to us. I'm not an expert in this. I can only say that as an organization that has been working for 47 years with immigrant survivors, we need to ensure that the funding is able to continue in a way that will allow for providers to actually serve the community in the way that we know how. Because we are the ones that are on the ground understanding the complexities and also the almost seemingly insurmountable barriers that our survivors face. So in order for us to do our work, we need to also have partnership and understand like all of the different barriers that we need. And we're not exclusive to undocumented survivors. We're not exclusive to immigrant survivors. And I don't think any organization that actually is receiving any of this funding is. And that is the thing, is like, we've already been doing this work for so long. And the reason why we do this work is because, number one, it is an unmet need. Number two, we are focused on cultural communities and we know the community that we serve. And so we want to be right there. And number three, the government is not able to provide those services. And that's why nonprofits sprout out to begin with. They are born because there is a need and an unmet need. And here we are, in the same way that Survivor Justice Center and Tahari are there to provide those services. So that is within, it's an ongoing dialogue. I can't say that, it's black and white, because it never is. And I think that part of this potential administration is to create fear and is to create acquiescence before you actually need to give acquiescence. And also to create a lack of dialogue, of understanding that actually, we are serving exactly who we're supposed to be serving, which is survivors of domestic violence and sexual assault, regardless. Being able to provide that service is imperative, and it's part of the way that we're keeping safe communities. I know that I was also asked to speak about the housing urban development, most recent restrictions that were put, or conditions that were put on the funding. And that is still an ongoing. I know that we have a lot of dialogue right now within the continuum of care. So Center for the Pacific Asian Family is part of the continuum of care funding. And that is a pass-through within the Los Angeles Homeless Service Authority in Los Angeles. And some of those restrictions are, new, and also focused on ensuring that that we are not using our funding for any kind of elective abortions, and that we are not using our grant funds to promote gender ideology. So these are some components where we are still trying to understand what that actually entails and actually what kind of protections that we have. And currently, within the Personal Responsibility and Work Opportunity Reconciliation Act of 1996, which is allowing for many different federally funded programs and services, allowing for illegal immigrants, folks who are going through the process to access those services. That has recently been rescinded by HHS. And under HHS, there are a plethora of different programs, federally funded programs that actually people who have gone through kind of the VAWA process and also have, maintained any kind of permanent residency have been able to actually access. And HHS has rescinded that protection. HUD has not yet rescinded those protections. It's Friday. I don't know if maybe I'm missing something right now. Maybe it has been announced. I'm not sure. But as far as I know from last night, those protections are still in place, which means that we will continue to serve those who are coming to our program and who are identifying as survivors and those who are homeless. So this is an ongoing and it is really problematic that we have to not only contend with limited resources, limited funding, and also the trauma and trying to ensure that our survivors are protected within our shelters, especially from ICE. But now we're constantly having to look at what restrictions are coming at us with the funding that we've had for a very long period of time. So my call to action is to understand the environment and also to raise awareness that immigrant survivors do need services and there are organizations that can help and that we do what we can because it is a necessity and because we save lives, and to also understand that if you have foundations, if you have individuals who want to do something, there is so much that can be done. And between Carmen and Morgan and Pilar and myself and probably everybody in this virtual space, we can have countless number of pages of things that we can do. And it's just ensuring that we don't stop talking about what is needed within our most vulnerable communities. Thank you.
Thank you, Fatima. I'm glad that all of you have a message of hope in this difficult situation. And I'm going to go through some of the questions and I'm going to ask all the panelists to chime in because we have only about 10 minutes left and I want to go through as many of the questions as possible. Richard Wren asked, what do you see with everything that you guys have explained so far? What do you see as the most urgent legal or policy change needed right now to ensure immigrant survivors of domestic violence are not forced into silence? Who wants to chime in? Let me know.
I can start us off. I mentioned the 6th Ground campaign, so pushing Congress to create a 6th ground or basis for asylum based on gender. It's just common sense. Women are targeted because of their gender. LGBTQIA identifying individuals are targeted because of their gender or sexual orientation. That's an easy fix to our laws. I think the other is to put pressure on both local law enforcement and local governments to disentangle their law enforcement from immigration actions and to provide that sense of safety and security so survivors come forward again.
Anyone else wants to make a comment?
For us, I
Panel?
think,
Go ahead.
maintaining confidentiality for survivors and the confidentiality that we hold as attorneys with our clients, and to make sure that attorneys aren't punished for withholding confidential information. And I completely agree for local governments not to impose barriers on survivors that create chilling effects. For example, asking for an identification is an issue we have been working with local law enforcement on. A survivor may not have that, and it may make them afraid that their information is going to be turned over. So confidentiality, that is so important under VAWA, as Morgan had said.
A really good question here, especially because so many of our reporters cater to these communities. From Ronnie Chung, are there resources that survivors that don't speak English can easily access? You guys probably all have something to say about that.
Yes, I can definitely speak to that. Our own organization has services in 30 different Asian Pacific Islander languages, and we have oftentimes been called by survivors of non-API, but also limited English. And so, you're welcome to call our hotline, and we can always refer out to the appropriate organization that would be able to help in the best way possible. And there is also a wide, vast network within LA County of domestic violence, sexual assault organizations that can provide some multilingual services as well.
Okay, and I saw a question here, I think it was from Henrietta. What is driving this administration and the previous Trump administration to make it harder for women and families to protect themselves? What is the motivation here? Can you explain it to us? Any of you?
I will jump in to say it's hard to get inside anyone's head, but we see societal norms around power and control being minimized by folks in leadership. And I think that then perpetuates this notion of, going back to a time before a lot of our civil rights and equal rights and, things like VAWA were in place. And the motivation is, something I can't guess about, but the feeling I think is that lots of communities are afraid, but we remind you that there are folks out there to help and the rights remain. There are still legal rights, there are still lawyers, there are still laws. And so that is where I would urge folks to know that we are here when survivors need us.
Okay, there's a question by Nicole Chang. People are being arrested in the process of appearing in court. Does the applicant have to go to court in person?
That
She has to-
varies. So, attorneys across the country, at least in the immigration court context, I can share, are able to file what we call a motion for WebEx or remote appearance. But each individual judge decides whether or not they want to grant that motion. There's also been some suggestion that the administration is encouraging judges to deny those motions so that people have to appear in person and are then susceptible to arrest. So there's mechanisms, but how successful they are will really depend on who the individual is before.
Another question. Yes, go ahead.
I just wanted to reiterate that is in the family courts or guardianship courts, the courts are messaging to ask for remote appearances. They will accommodate that. And that again is not immigration court. So if you're coming to court for a restraining order, you can appear remotely.
Gotcha. Okay. Another interesting question here. Last week, it was announced that military attorneys from the Department of Defense would be assigned to immigration courts to make up for the shortage of immigration judges. What changes are expected?
Well, in order to open up spaces for the JAG attorneys to come in and take on those positions, mass layoffs and firings of immigration judges occurred. And I would encourage all reporters to look into the asylum approval rates of the judges that were recently let go or fired, because I think you will see a pattern of higher approval rates for those judges. I think the administration is creating a process to deny and dismiss applications for asylum much more quickly. There was a board decision that issued just yesterday that, for the first time ever in history, states that judges can pre-termit asylum cases. So in other words, before someone even has a hearing to present their case can be denied and kicked out of court. So there's some really serious due process concerns that are arising right now with the way everything is processing. And I put in the chat a link to the track system where you can look at approval rates by judge.
Okay, wonderful. Irene Diaz-Bazan is asking if there are resources available to support these migrant women who often remain in the shadows for years. She's referring to the high cost of applying to one of these visas.
Yeah, so another thing that happened out of that one big, beautiful bill that was passed is that asylum applicants now, for the first time ever, have to pay a $100 application fee. And then this is just extraordinary to me. For every year that their case remains pending before our government, they have to pay an annual fee of $100 for that case to remain pending. It's no fault of their own that the government can't process those applications expeditiously, but they have to pay annually for it. All of the other fees, or many of the other fees, like appeals, went up, sometimes doubling or tripling, as did waivers for inadmissibility that a lot of these applicants need.
They're certainly not trying to make it easier.
And Pilar, can I add, sorry, can
Yeah,
I
go
just
ahead.
add that we are working on, letting our donors and our foundation partners know. So this is another call to action to set up funds to help pay. Like there's a fund for detention for bonds. The same, we're looking for support around helping pay for the fees because we don't want there to be that increased barrier for survivors.
This will be the last question because we're running out of time. From Ling Wang, how can media help on urgent policy change and reform? How can we help?
By having these spaces and uplifting the work that is being done and that continues to be done under the threat of so many different components to our, not just our client safety, but also sometimes our own personal safety. So understanding the risk and that we're continuing to do this no matter what, because we know that there's a need. We need reporters to be able to highlight that, and also to highlight, the fact that there's a need for more resources out there. So that's what I would really hope would come out of this, and have more spaces like this.
Please, Morgan and Carmen, add your 2 cents and to say goodbye because we're closing pretty soon.
Yeah, so I agree. Help us tell the story and spread the word. People call all the time and ask how they can help. You can help. You can contribute. We have a monthly donor campaign. Like I said, we could use volunteers and support. Call your electeds. When we put out the blast that we need folks to call their Congress people, put that out in the news for us. Help us. We're all on social media, on LinkedIn. We're trying to spread the word. And there are safe, confidential, legal, and social services that are free to help reach out, share the information. I put the national hotline information in the chat, and we do have culturally responsive, specific services for folks in their language. And thank you for giving us this opportunity.
Yeah, similarly, keep the spotlight on this, and I put a link in the chat to more materials.
Thank you, all of you, for the work that you do in helping families and women and communities, and to Juana for her courage for coming forward and talking to us today. And thank you to